"Do not touch the bag." The word seemed to come from nowhere, because Eleanor Whitfield had not stirred, had not opened her eyes, and had not spoken. Yet Marcus Doyle froze, his hand hovering above the open leather purse resting beside her, inside which $20,000 sat in neat bands beneath a diamond watch and a sealed envelope marked confidential. Outside, rain hammered the black sedan in hard silver sheets. Inside, the only sounds were the steady sweep of the wipers and Eleanor's carefully controlled breathing. Marcus glanced at her reflection in the rearview mirror. The powerful hotel executive appeared to be asleep beneath a cashmere coat, her pale face turned toward the window, one hand resting loosely on the seat. Marcus needed money more than anyone in that car realized. His rent was 11 days overdue, his daughter Grace needed white shoes for her school recital the next morning, his wallet held $38, and his fuel gauge had been flashing red since he left downtown. He studied the money once more. Beneath the coat, Eleanor's fingers tensed. Marcus reached further, but only to lift the edge of the purse, pull a clean handkerchief from his jacket, and wipe rainwater dripping from the window seam off the expensive leather before closing the clasp and setting the purse safely in the middle of the seat. "That shouldn't be left open," he murmured. Something shifted inside Eleanor, though she kept her eyes shut. Before continuing, tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if you believe a person's real character shows in what they do when no one appears to be watching, consider liking this video and subscribing, because stories like this remind us that dignity still counts. Now, back to Marcus Doyle. At 11:47 that night the city had all but vanished behind the storm, streetlights smearing across the wet asphalt like broken gold. The sedan smelled faintly of leather, coffee, and the costly perfume Eleanor wore into boardrooms where people feared her silence more than anyone else's temper. She had built Whitfield Crown Hotels into one of the country's most respected hospitality companies. She could buy buildings with a signature, dismiss executives with a sentence, and command a room without ever raising her voice. But trust was the one thing her fortune had never purchased. Marcus adjusted the heat, aiming a vent toward the back seat after noticing her hand looked cold, then removed his own worn scarf, folded it, and laid it over her fingers without touching her skin. Eleanor nearly opened her eyes, but instead stayed still, remembering what Dean Foster had told her earlier that evening: a desperate man will always reveal his price. She had wanted proof he was right, so she had left the cash exposed, the watch visible, and the envelope within easy reach of temptation. Marcus had touched none of it. Then the sedan slowed. Beneath the flickering yellow light of an abandoned gas station, a woman stood beside a stalled minivan, a small boy pressed against her coat. Marcus leaned forward, peering through the rain. Eleanor had given one clear instruction before pretending to sleep: no stops, no delays, home before midnight. He glanced at the clock, then at the frightened child outside, and his hand drifted toward the turn signal. Eleanor's pulse quickened. The money had only been the first test. What Marcus did next would break every rule she had set, cost him the job he badly needed, and leave her in tears until sunrise. Just before his fingers pressed the signal, memory pulled him back 6 hours, to the cramped kitchen of his rented duplex, where he'd stood holding a red overdue notice from the property manager while Grace sat at the table with one white shoe in her lap, its sole separated near the toe, trying to mend it with school glue. "It'll hold," she said, pressing the rubber together. Marcus looked again at the notice: 3 days to pay $1,140 or face eviction. "You shouldn't have to wear those tomorrow," he told her. She only shrugged, eyes still on the shoe. "Nobody will be looking at my feet." "I will." "Then look at my face instead," she said, smiling, which somehow made it worse. Late November light slid through the blinds in thin gray bands, the heater clicked without warming much, and the kitchen smelled of tomato soup, laundry soap, and the cinnamon candle Grace lit whenever she missed her mother. Marcus tucked the notice beneath a stack of unopened bills, having grown skilled at making fear look tidy. "I picked up an extra driving job tonight," he said. "Executive service, good pay, with a completion bonus." "Enough for the shoes?" Grace asked. "Enough for the shoes." He didn't mention the rent, the fuel bill, the grocery money, or the cracked mirror he'd ignored for 7 months. A child shouldn't have to carry every number keeping her father awake. His phone buzzed. Dean Foster's name lit the screen. "Doyle," Dean said when he answered, "you have one chance tonight. Miss a turn, arrive late, or embarrass this company, and you're finished. Understood?" "Understood. Your passenger is Eleanor Whitfield." Marcus glanced toward Grace. Even he recognized the name. Whitfield Crown-owned luxury hotels from Boston to San Diego. "She expects discretion. She'll have it." Dean let a pause stretch just long enough to feel deliberate. "People in your position sometimes mistake access for opportunity. Don't." Marcus's jaw tightened. "I know the difference between what's near me and what belongs to me." Dean laughed quietly. "We'll see." The call ended. Grace had caught enough to sense the insult without understanding it fully, and she crossed the kitchen to wrap her arms around his waist, resting her cheek against his shirt. "Mom used to say being poor isn't the same as being small." Marcus closed his eyes. "Your mother said a lot of things better than I ever could. You still listen." That evening he knelt to retie the loose lace on her damaged shoe and promised he'd be home before her recital began, a promise that followed him straight into the storm. Now, at 11:47, with Eleanor apparently asleep behind him and a terrified child standing beside a dead minivan, Marcus stared at the dashboard clock. Stop, and the bonus, the shoes, maybe the job itself, were gone. Keep driving, and he'd still make it home before midnight. 3 choices, 3 consequences, 1 conscience. He pressed the signal, steered onto the shoulder, and murmured, "Some promises are worth keeping. Others are worth breaking." In the back seat, Eleanor opened her eyes just enough to watch him step out into the downpour. The rain swallowed him instantly, soaking his jacket and turning the gravel shoulder to shining black mud. Eleanor lifted her head slightly, watching through barely open eyes as he hurried toward the stranded woman, who held the boy tightly against her chest while the wind tugged at her coat. "Are you hurt?" Marcus called. "No, but my son can't catch his breath." "Get him into the car, it's warm." 3 short sentences, no hesitation, no thought spared for the clock. Eleanor lowered her head before he could look back, resuming her stillness, though her mind was no longer on the storm but on the test itself. Earlier that evening, in her office on the 42nd floor, Dean had placed Marcus's personnel file on her desk: overdue rent, medical debt from his late wife's final year, a thin bank balance, a daughter depending on him. Dean tapped the page. He's exactly the kind of man who takes what opportunity leaves unguarded. Eleanor looked out over a city of glowing windows beneath winter clouds. Or exactly the kind of man your reports fail to understand. Dean smiled. Then test him. She hated the idea for how cruel it sounded, yet agreed to it because betrayal had taught her that cruelty could wear the mask of caution. 2 years earlier, the man she'd planned to marry had used her name to funnel money through fraudulent contracts, aided by 3 executives she'd trusted, one of whom had stood beside her at her daughter's memorial, vowing loyalty, while quietly stealing from the foundation created in the child's name. Since then, Eleanor trusted paperwork over voices, cameras over promises, locked doors over open hands. Before entering the sedan she had placed $20,000 in her purse, left the diamond watch beside it, angled her phone so a banking alert would light the screen, loosened the flap of the confidential envelope, and switched on the small security camera hidden in the rear console. Money, privacy, and secrets, 3 temptations set within reach of a desperate man. Marcus had touched none of them. He'd closed the purse, turned the phone face down, and pushed the envelope deeper into the bag without reading a word of it. Eleanor first assumed he hadn't spotted the camera, but 20 minutes into the drive his eyes met its tiny red light in the mirror, and he studied it for a quiet second. "Some people spend so long guarding what they own," he said softly, "they forget to notice what it costs them." The words landed somewhere accusations never had. He knew she was watching, and still he had covered her cold hand with his scarf. Outside, he opened the rear door and guided the shivering mother toward the warmth. Eleanor shut her eyes again just before the dome light switched on. "I'm sorry," the woman whispered. "Don't apologize," Marcus said. "Just help me keep him calm." Eleanor lay motionless beneath the coat as the child's uneven breathing filled the car. She had built 3 tests for Marcus Doyle, but as he knelt beside the boy, giving away warmth, time, and money he couldn't spare, she realized there had always been a 4th test, the only one she hadn't designed, because this time it was her own character being examined. "Call for help," Marcus told the mother. "Tell them he's 8 and struggling to breathe. There's no signal on my phone. Use mine." She took it with trembling hands while Marcus opened the emergency compartment beneath the front seat, finding a flashlight, thermal blankets, bottled water, and a first aid kit, but no inhaler, no oxygen. The boy curled against his mother, his small shoulders rising too fast beneath a blue sweatshirt. Eleanor listened with her eyes closed as Marcus crouched to the child's level. "What's your name, buddy?" "Ethan." "Okay, Ethan, look at me, you're not alone." He kept his voice low beneath the noise of the storm, helping the boy sit upright, loosening the scarf at his neck, guiding his breathing while his mother spoke to the dispatcher. Rain drummed on the roof, the heater pushed warm air through the cabin carrying the scent of wet wool, leather, and roadside mud. Eleanor had sat through countless charity dinners where people pledged millions to children they'd never meet. Marcus had less than $40, yet he was giving this frightened boy something no foundation could ever list on a balance sheet, his full attention. The dashboard phone rang, Dean Foster. Marcus glanced at it and let it ring, then a message appeared, "Resume route immediately. Mrs. Whitfield must be home before midnight." He read it once and turned the screen face down. Shame moved through Eleanor like cold water. She had authorized Dean to monitor the trip, telling him not to interfere unless Marcus failed, and now a child was gasping 10 feet from the highway while Dean saw only a delay. "The dispatcher says the nearest ambulance is 25 minutes out," the mother said. "The roads near the overpass are blocked." Marcus studied the windshield. 2 miles ahead a green sign pointed toward Pine Hollow Urgent Care. "There's a clinic about 7 miles east. It closes at midnight." He checked the time, 11:51. "Then we have 9 minutes. The mother glanced toward the back seat. "But your passenger, my passenger is warm and safe," he said, looking at the boy. "Your son isn't." Marcus moved quickly, buckling Ethan into the front seat before returning to gently adjust the coat over Eleanor's shoulder, his hand pausing near the scarf across her fingers, still believing, or perhaps simply choosing to believe, that she was asleep. The phone rang a 3rd time. Marcus answered. "Continue to the Whitfield residence," Dean ordered. "That's not possible. There's a child who needs medical care. That's not your responsibility." The words hung in the car, cold and final. Marcus looked at Ethan, then at Eleanor's reflection. "Tonight it is. Leave the route and you lose the completion bonus." His jaw tightened, but his voice held steady. "Understood. You could lose your job. Then I'll lose it." He ended the call, shifted into drive, and turned east instead of north, tires cutting through standing water as the city lights disappeared behind them. Eleanor opened her eyes once his attention was back on the road, watching the man who had just given up money his own daughter needed, without asking for praise or protection. She had believed desperation exposes a person's price. Marcus was proving that dignity was what remained once the price grew too steep. The sedan reached Pine Hollow Urgent Care at 11:58. Marcus stopped beneath the covered entrance before the tires had settled. "Stay with him," he told the mother, "I'll get help," then sprinted through the rain and pounded on the glass as the lobby lights began to dim. A nurse in blue scrubs appeared. "We're closing. There's a child outside who can't breathe. Bring him in." 3 sentences, and the building came back to life. The nurse unlocked the doors while a colleague wheeled out a chair. Marcus carried Ethan in himself, his mother close behind. Eleanor stayed in the back seat, eyes shut, though the warm air felt colder without them there. The clinic doors closed, the clock turned to midnight. Across the city, Grace Doyle's broken white shoes still sat on the kitchen table. 15 minutes later Marcus returned alone, his hair soaked, jacket heavy with rainwater, a small receipt pinched between his fingers. He opened the driver's door but didn't climb in, leaning instead against the frame to count what remained in his wallet: 10, 5, 3 ones. He stared at the $18 for a long moment before folding them away. Eleanor's eyes opened slightly. "He's stable," Ethan's mother said, stepping out behind him, clutching the clinic paperwork. "They said the treatment worked, but my insurance lapsed last month. I don't know how I'll cover the medicine." Marcus glanced at the receipt. "It's paid." "What?" "The visit and the first prescription." "You can't do that." "I already did." Her eyes welled. "You don't even know us." He gave a tired smile. "I know what it looks like when a parent's afraid they can't help their child." She looked toward the sedan. "Your passenger must be furious." "She has every right to be." "Will you lose your job?" He looked through the window at Eleanor's still form. "Probably." "Then why did you stop?" Rainwater ran from his hair to his jaw as the clinic sign buzzed unevenly overhead, wind carrying the smell of wet pavement and pine from the dark field beyond the lot. Marcus breathed slowly. "Because years from now my daughter might forget whether I bought her new shoes, but I hope she never learns that her father drove past a frightened child to protect a paycheck." Eleanor closed her eyes fully before he returned, something inside her cracking quietly, like ice giving way under morning sun. Marcus settled behind the wheel, peeled off his soaked jacket, and started the engine as his phone lit with a final message from Dean: "Report to headquarters at 8 a.m. Do not expect another assignment." He read it, locked the screen, and set it face down before glancing into the mirror. "I'm sorry for the delay, Mrs. Whitfield," he said softly, "but I'd make the same choice again." Eleanor kept up the pretense of sleep, because opening her eyes would have shown him that the woman who'd arranged every test had no idea how to hide tears. The sedan pulled away from Pine Hollow at 12:23, carrying two people who were no longer strangers, though only one of them yet understood why. Marcus drove on, both hands steady on the wheel, his damp shirt cooling as the heater cleared the fogged windshield. Eleanor stayed beneath the cashmere coat, face toward the dark glass, no longer testing him, only listening. His phone rang through the hands-free system, Grace's name lighting the dashboard. He hesitated, then answered. "You should be asleep." "I tried," came her small voice. "Did you get Mrs. Whitfield home?" He checked the clock. "Not yet." "Are you still getting the bonus?" He didn't answer right away, rain whispering softer now beneath the tires, distant porch lights drifting past like candles. Eleanor opened her eyes just enough to see his face in the mirror. "No, sweetheart," he finally said. "I don't think I am." Grace fell quiet. "So no new shoes?" "I'm sorry." "Don't be, I still have the old ones. The sole's coming loose again, but I'll use more glue." He lowered his gaze for a painful second before returning it to the road. "Grace, I promised you, you also promised Mom you'd help people when you could." His hands tightened on the wheel. "That's different. Did you help somebody tonight?" He glanced at Eleanor's reflection, unaware she was now watching him closely. "A little boy was sick." "Is he okay?" "He's going to be." Grace exhaled in relief. "Then Mom would be proud of you." The word settled into the car with more force than any accusation could have carried. Marcus swallowed hard. "I hope so. I know so." A rustle came through the speakers, followed by the faint chime of the wind bell near their kitchen window. "Will you still come to my recital?" "Nothing's keeping me away." "Even if you lose your job?" "Especially then." Grace laughed softly. "Good night, Dad." "Good night, Peanut." I love you more than every mile between here and home." The call ended, leaving only the wipers and the low hum of the engine. Marcus stared ahead, but Eleanor caught the grief tightening his jaw. Beside her on the seat, something slipped from the open edge of her purse, a red thread bracelet, one side broken, faded beads scattering across the leather. Marcus spotted it when he stopped at a red light, reaching back to gather each bead into his palm. Eleanor shut her eyes before he turned around. He pulled a small sewing kit decorated with purple stars from the glove compartment. "Grace leaves half her life in this car," he murmured under the dashboard glow, threading a needle and beginning to mend the bracelet, patient and unhurried, unaware that Eleanor's daughter had made it just 7 days before the accident, the last gift the child had ever placed in her mother's hands. When he finished, he laid the bracelet gently across Eleanor's fingers. "Whatever made this," he said quietly, "was made with love. Things like that are never really broken, they just need someone patient enough to put the pieces back together." Eleanor kept her eyes shut until the light changed, but the first tear had already reached the scarf covering her hand. The sedan turned through the iron gates of the Whitfield estate at 12:49 a.m., gravel whispering beneath the tires as Marcus followed the long circular drive toward a house glowing behind bare oak trees. He stopped beneath the stone portico, shifted into park, and sat quietly a moment. Eleanor felt the mended bracelet resting in her palm, the red thread no longer perfect, one not larger than the rest, a stray white thread showing between two faded beads, and somehow that imperfection made it feel alive again. Marcus stepped out, circled the car, and opened her door. "Mrs. Whitfield," he said gently, "we're home." Eleanor opened her eyes slowly, playing out the final moment of a lie she could no longer bear. "Already," she managed, her voice nearly breaking. Marcus pretended not to notice as she sat up and saw his scarf across her lap, his soaked jacket, and the untouched purse beside her, every dollar accounted for, the confidential envelope unopened, her phone exactly where he'd left it face down. "Did something happen?" she asked. He could have defended himself, blamed the storm, the stranded family, or Dean. Instead he simply said, "There was a child who needed help. I made a call that may have cost your company time, and cost you your bonus." "Yes." "Do you regret it?" "No." The answer carried no anger, no pride, no calculation. Eleanor looked down at the bracelet. "You repaired this?" "It fell from your bag." "Do you know who made it?" "No, ma'am. My daughter, Ivy. She was 9. Marcus went still as rain tapped softly on the roof and, somewhere near the garden, a wind chime rang 3 lonely notes. "I'm sorry," he said. "She made it a week before she died." He didn't reach for her, didn't offer easy words about healing or time, he simply stood by the open door and gave her grief the dignity of silence. After a moment he said, "Then I'm glad it found its way back to your hand." Eleanor studied the man she had tested with money, secrets, and humiliation. He had needed everything she'd placed before him, yet taken nothing. He had been watched, threatened, judged, and still protected a stranger's child as though character mattered more than consequence. "Marcus," she whispered, "did you know I was awake?" He met her eyes. "I knew there was a camera. That wasn't my question." He considered her for a long second. "I thought you might be listening." And the boy still needed help. There it was, no performance, no hidden bargain, only the truth. He handed her the scarf, wished her good night, and drove off into the rain. Eleanor entered the silent house alone, passing the marble staircase, the dark dining room, and the portrait of Ivy near the library, then sat on the floor beneath it, pressed the mended bracelet to her chest, and finally let herself cry, for her daughter, for every betrayal that had taught her to mistake suspicion for wisdom, and because a poor single father had shown her more grace in one stormy night than wealth had shown her in a lifetime. At 7:58 the next morning, Marcus walked into the executive conference room in the same dark slacks from the night before and a clean white shirt he'd ironed before sunrise, having slept barely 40 minutes. Grace had already been dressed for school when he left, standing in the kitchen with her mended shoes, pretending not to notice the worry on his face. Whatever happens, she'd told him, come to the recital. He'd promised he would. Now he stood at the end of a polished walnut table while 12 executives studied him as though hardship were a stain he'd tracked into the room. Dean Foster sat beside an empty chair reserved for Eleanor, a tablet displaying the previous night's route report in front of him. You ignored a direct order, Dean said. I stopped for a medical emergency. You abandoned your assigned route. I changed it. You caused a 49-minute delay. A child couldn't breathe. Flat answers, flat accusations, no apology offered. Morning light pressed pale and cold against the glass walls while the ventilation hummed above them, and the room smelled of coffee, furniture polish, and rain drying on shoe leather. Dean leaned back. This company can't run on personal emotion. Marcus looked around the table. Then maybe it should run on judgment. A few executives shifted uneasily. Dean's eyes narrowed. Your employment is terminated, effective immediately. Marcus nodded once. Understood. Nothing else to say. Only this, if keeping the job meant leaving that child on the highway, then I shouldn't keep it. The doors opened, and Eleanor walked in without an assistant, without a briefcase, without the polished composure she usually wore each morning. Her eyes were swollen from crying, and the mended red bracelet sat plainly on her wrist, its white thread visible between the beads. Everyone at the table rose except Marcus, who stayed seated, not out of disrespect, but because something in her expression told him the room was about to shift. Sit down, she said, then turned to Dean. Play the recording. His face went rigid. Eleanor, this is an internal matter. Play it. The wall screen lit with footage from the sedan. Marcus closing the purse, turning the phone face down, laying his scarf over her hand, then Dean's voice ordering him to leave Ethan behind. The room grew quieter with every word. When it ended, Eleanor set a folder on the table. Last night I tested Mr. Doyle because I let suspicion disguise itself as wisdom. I put money, private information, and valuables within his reach. He took nothing. She turned to Marcus. Then a real test appeared, one I hadn't arranged, a frightened mother, a sick child, a decision with real consequences. Dean stood. He broke policy. Eleanor opened the folder. And you stole from the employee emergency fund. The color drained from his face as she revealed transfer records, falsified invoices, and approvals tied to accounts under his control. You told me desperate people always show their price, she continued. You were right, Mr. Doyle showed me his dignity had no price. You showed me yours. Security stepped in, and Dean said nothing as they walked him out. No one at the table moved. Eleanor turned back to Marcus, her voice softer now. I thought I was testing your honesty. She glanced down at Ivy's bracelet. But you were testing whether anything honest was still left in me. For several seconds the most powerful room in the company held nothing but silence, and the poorest man in it stood taller than everyone else. The quiet lingered until Eleanor pulled out the chair beside her. Please, sit. He stayed standing. Before I do, I need to know if I still have a job. A faint murmur passed through the room. Eleanor nodded. You do, but not as a driver. His expression didn't change. Then as what? Director of Employee Emergency Response. Surprised looks passed among the executives as she continued before anyone could object. Last night you made decisions under pressure, protected a family that needed help, and accepted the consequences without asking for recognition. Those are leadership qualities this company has been rewarding in the wrong people. Marcus glanced at the folder, then at the bracelet on her wrist. I'm not qualified for an executive title. Then help me build the position properly. And the employees hurt by the stolen fund will have every dollar restored today. He considered it. The program can't exist just to reward me. It won't. It has to cover night workers, contractors, people without senior titles. Agreed. And no one should have to prove desperation before getting help. Her eyes softened. Agreed. Marcus finally sat, not accepting charity, but the chance to build dignity into the company itself. That afternoon he left headquarters with his old position restored until the new department was ready, his lost bonus returned, and the clinic bill reimbursed. He drove straight to Grace's school, arriving 3 minutes before the auditorium doors closed, the room smelling of stage dust, fresh paint, and winter coats still damp from the morning rain. Parents filled the folding chairs while children waited behind a blue curtain painted with silver stars. Marcus found a seat near the back. Grace stepped onto the stage in her simple white dress and the old shoes she'd patched with glue, one sole lifting slightly as she walked, chin held high. Then someone sat beside him, Eleanor, in a gray sweater and dark jeans, no business suit, no diamonds, no expression meant to command a room, only Ivy's bracelet on her wrist. "I hope this seat isn't taken," she whispered. Marcus looked at her, then at the empty chair. "It is now." The music began, and Grace found her father in the crowd, her nervous face brightening before she noticed Eleanor beside him. For one brief moment her eyes rested on the red bracelet, and she smiled as though she understood something no adult had explained. After the performance she ran toward them, her damaged shoe tapping unevenly across the floor, and Marcus knelt to embrace her while Eleanor stood a few feet away, unsure where she belonged. Grace looked up at her. "Did my dad help you, too?" Eleanor glanced at Marcus. "More than he knows." Grace reached for her hand and touched the mended thread. "That's pretty." "My daughter made it," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. Grace didn't ask where the daughter was, she simply held on to Eleanor's hand. Marcus watched them beneath the soft auditorium lights, surrounded by applause and families gathering their children. There was no sudden promise of romance, no fortune offered as a miracle cure, no wound healed overnight, only respect, a second chance, and 3 people learning that family sometimes begins the moment someone chooses not to walk past another person's pain. In the months that followed, Marcus's emergency program helped hundreds of employees facing medical bills, housing crises, and sudden loss, while Eleanor attended every review meeting, not as the woman with all the answers, but as someone learning to trust again, joining Marcus and Grace for Saturday breakfasts, school events, and quiet walks through the park. Love didn't arrive loudly, it came through patience, honesty, and the simple grace of showing up. And whenever Eleanor looked at the white thread holding Ivy's bracelet together, she remembered the stormy night a poor single father refused to take what wasn't his, and gave away what little he had. What would you have done in Marcus's place, and do you think Eleanor deserved a second chance after testing him this way? Share your thoughts in the comments, especially the moment that touched you most, and thank you for watching all the way to the end.